Hello, my name is Abigail Kayabyab, and this is my leadership interview video. I chose to interview Mr. Derek Novato. Mr. Derek Novato is a leader in the World Tangsudo Association, a Korean martial arts association that spans across the globe. He is one of 8 masters in Region 21, which covers Georgia and Florida. He owns his own martial arts school called Novato Karate Arts in Jacksonville, and is the World Tangsudo Scholarship Chair for Region 21. Outside of his position in the World Tangsudo Association, he was the senior designer for Allstate Benefits, an insurance company in Jacksonville, Florida, from 2005 to 2014, and was later their senior implementation manager. He was also the senior graphic designer of Availity, a health insurance agency in Jacksonville, and is now its creative director since last year. I know of Mr. Derek Novato because I was part of the World Tangsudo Association. I chose him because he was a leader in a variety of ways and in different environments, from a more professional environment in the companies he worked for to a more traditional yet family-like environment in the World Tangsudo Association. I want to become a leader who is flexible in many environments as he is. I want to become a dentist in the future, and an important part of leadership as a dentist would be adapting to your environment and the people you work with, even as it changes from one room to another. I also have a passion for martial arts. I was able to get in touch with Mr. Novato through the connections I had with Novato Karate Arts. I was able to call him directly and schedule an interview as to present myself as more personable. He agreed readily and warmly. During the interview, my perception of Mr. Derek Novato was that he valued making people feel comfortable with talking with him. He was very welcoming and greeted me kindly. While I was not able to see him face to face, I had a sense that he strived to sound open and genuine with the way he fluctuated his voice to show enthusiasm and had a gentler voice when talking about more serious topics. From this, I could get a sense of what his personal brand is, which is vital to becoming a leader, as we have learned. I would say that his personal brand would include being amiable and having a more laid-back nature. His friendliness was also not over the top or overly enthusiastic. He seemed genuine in his disposition. One of the main points in authentic leadership is relational transparency and being open and honest in presenting one's true self to others, which I think he demonstrated well. He did not oversell his leadership positions and was humble. He thought deeply about each question and was thorough in his explanations, as he would pause after each question to collect his thoughts. One of the main leadership characteristics of Mr. Novato emphasized was the importance of being a good influence on those that follow you. He said, "To be a good leader is to set a good example." He talked about how when he grew up, he would model himself after the leaders around him and try to become more like them or better. One of the influences he talked about was of his old karate instructor, Master Kevin Case, whom he looked up to. Mr. Novato said, "Maybe you're not the best speaker, but your actions play a big part." This resounded with me because I value leading by example as well. Being passionate was another leadership characteristic he described, which ties into setting a good example. He talked about the importance of being passionate in what you do, whether it was martial arts or graphic design. He said, "If you don't show the passion, how can they strive to have that same passion, or to strive to be as successful or better than you?" Besides setting a good example and being passionate, he also discussed how vital it is to be willing to communicate as a leader. For example, just stopping by and checking in to see how people are doing is important and can go a long way. He talked about his own experience reaching out to people, especially now during the COVID pandemic, and how it was harder because you cannot just stop by someone's desk. Even so, he explained how leaders need to make an effort to communicate with each other, even if it is just through Zoom. He said, "It makes them feel included and that you appreciate their presence, even though they're not in the office." Another key leadership characteristic we discussed was the significance of being responsible. He talked about how you have to be responsible with the way you say things and the way you act, even on social media. For example, he explained how he did not post often on social media, because if you post the wrong things, he said you're being irresponsible. He places a great deal of importance in being mindful of what he puts out there. In class, we talked about the skills approach and how emotional intelligence can be an important part of being a leader. When I apply what I've learned, I draw the conclusion that Mr. Novato has a good grasp in emotional intelligence, especially regarding self-management, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. As we've learned, self-management or self-regulation deals with managing one's internal states, impulses, and emotions. I thought that Mr. Novato did well in this aspect because of how much he emphasized being careful in what you say and do, as it can affect the people around you. He said, "You have to strategize what you say and understand what the impact will be from what you're saying." I believe he also has strong social awareness and relationship management because he talked about how communicating with the people you work with can bolster the work environment. When I study Mr. Novato's leadership under the behavioral approach, I am reminded of his emphasis on finding a balance between being too friendly and lenient and being too aloof as a leader. He explained how one of the leaders he looked up to when he was younger, Master Case, was very approachable, yet very professional. He said, he knew the difference between being an instructor and being a friend, and cautioned against becoming too close and losing respect as a leader. In this way, I feel as though he is cautioning against the country club 1-9 approach. I believe he would be a Team 9-9 oriented leader because of his wish to work with committed individuals toward the organization's purpose. As a leader of a team of designers, one day he had to make the big decision of whether or not to give one of the designers work again. He said that he knew the designer would do well, but that his past of leaving the company a few times and coming only for new work without any passion for what he did led Mr. Novato to the decision of not sticking with him. The designer had no appreciation for his role and was opportunistic, and he chose to leave him behind, even if it would have been easy to bring him back. Mr. Novato said, "It doesn't set a good example for any other of my coworkers and the people that report to me." He was willing to sacrifice what he was used to for something that could be better. Above all, however, I believe that Mr. Novato exemplifies servant leadership theory the best. His commitment to the growth of others, especially when he describes his leadership in the World Tangsudo Association, is shown whenever he says he wants the others to become better than him one day. It is interesting to see, however, that he might not use this type of leadership as much in his creative director role, perhaps because of the context and culture that is important in servant leadership. After the interview, I found that Mr. Novato was a very thoughtful leader who was meticulous in how he behaved and showed himself to others. As I grew to learn more about him, I realized that my definition of a leader meshed especially well with how I viewed him. I always thought of a leader as someone who rallied people together for a certain cause and was a good example to those around them. After the interview, I was writing my philosophy statement and realized the influence the interview had on what I thought a leader a leader's competencies were. His statement, "To be a good leader is to set a good example," stuck with me. He never said this out of arrogance. Rather, he looked up to the leaders he knew and challenged himself to become the positive influence that they were. This is something that I want to bring into my own leadership. As I said before, I found Mr. Novato to be a cautious leader. He explained how he was careful in the way he addressed issues with people and watched what he said, did, and posted. He said that if you wanted positive attitudes from everyone, you yourself had to reinforce it with your own attitude. I want to be a careful leader as well, as people with power can influence others in large ways, intentionally and unintentionally. In the future, I also want to keep in mind the lesson he learned about striving for that balance in relationships with followers. You have to draw that line, he said. Mr. Novato described how he looked up to the leaders he knew, like Grandmaster Shin and Master Case, because of the presence they had about them, where everyone respected them and were not too aloof in a way that you could still approach them. He valued how he felt welcomed by them and felt like they were your friend even as a leader. I want to become a leader that is approachable yet respected as well. By cultivating this sort of open presence, communication would be better between leaders and followers. I definitely witnessed Mr. Novato's openness in his conversation with me. All in all, I feel like I really learned a lot about leadership from Mr. Novato and hope I can become a leader just like him.